So as part of the National Park Service, we became officially a system within the National Park Service last January. And since that time, there has been more interest in the National Heritage Areas program. So we're talking about feasibility studies a little bit more than we were prior to the bill's passage. And we want to make sure that everybody on our team has that same understanding so that when anyone asks our team internally what's going on, we're sharing the same information. And so Chris is joining us today so that we can make sure we're all sharing that same message. So, hey, Eric, you want to try one more time?
Maybe if he's signed off and signed back on.
Well, here, I will go ahead and is it okay if I share my screen? We'll go for this.
Yes. Do we need to make you a co-host or did you already do that, Kate? You already did that. Yeah. Okay, great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful.
If you want to go to slideshow, you can. Yeah.
Yeah. Except, the little thing at the top makes it look a little funny.
Whatever works for you.
Drag it down.
Right. Nope, you're already in my screen. Sorry. So what is a National Heritage Area? A National Heritage Area is a place designated by Congress where natural, cultural, historic, and scenic resources combine to form a cohesive, nationally distinctive landscape arising from patterns of human activity shaped by geography. These patterns make National Heritage Areas representative of the national experience through the physical features that remain and the traditions that have evolved in them. Continued use of the National Heritage Areas by people whose traditions help to shape that landscape, enhance their significance. And so earlier, when I heard you talking about the sugar, or making the sap and that, I'm like, that's part of what we're talking about. It's
Inside.
really about what this area is and what the
Also,
We currently have 62 National Heritage Areas in 36 states, and we recently got our first one in a territory in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. We also have right now, I believe, 6 National Heritage Area studies going on by the National Park Service, and that's to see if they would also be included. But I'll get to how an area is actually included a little bit more later. Let me keep going about what they are. So as we said, National Heritage Areas have a distinctive landscape. So it's something that you're probably not going to find everywhere. It's lived in. And that's super important to us, that it's a representative of the national experience, that people live there, that they can share about what it means to be there. It's planned around a region's shared heritage and the place-based resources. So there are things that you find when you come to visit a National Heritage Area. It's not something that you just move there or carry with you. It's something that you actually experience when you are in that area. And lastly, they're designated by Congress. We at the National Park Service are the stewards of the program, but every National Heritage Area is actually designated by Congress to be a part of that system. One of the things that we're really proud of is that this is a partnership program within the National Park Service. It is led by the community. This is not the Park Service coming in and saying, you should do this. This is actually communities coming together to talk about what is going to be best for their area. And we have seen now, and I'm sure Lois can talk about this, if you have different people trying to drive the study, there still has to be that conversation among stakeholders so you can see a long-term successful result from being a heritage area. It's not managed by the National Park Service. We actually are only the partners. The local coordinating entity does that. It is not owned by the National Park Service. There is no federal land involved. It is multidisciplinary approach. So we're looking at you all being the stewards, but you're having conversations in what preservation is, in natural resource conversations, in tourism, in recreation, in education. And of course, economic development is something that kind of flows from when you have these conversations among stakeholders in your communities. You do receive funding. The National Heritage Area is eligible to receive funding and technical assistance from the National Park Service. Currently, again, that's all determined by Congress, but right now they've been really generous in giving National Park Service money to give to the National Heritage Areas. So as I mentioned, there's resource protection, there's historic preservation, there is recreation, there is education, there's community development and economic development. We see that heritage areas kind of span the model of what they choose to focus on, but that's one of the beauties of this program because it's not really led by us as the National Park Service. We are responding to the needs of the stakeholders in the communities on what they really see as some of the most important work going on. So some of the benefits of having a National Heritage Area. We see sustainable economic development in these communities. We feel that there is healthy environment and people, especially by those who are engaging in either recreational activities to get the communities together, or they are engaging in trail activities, or just making sure that they're doing natural resource protection to encourage people to get outside. There's an improved quality of life, education and stewardship, community engagement and pride. And we do see these as we travel, all of our coordinators, as we travel throughout the National Heritage Areas. We see these things in the community that we visit. And it's actually, for us, a great source of enjoyment too, to see that our model is working. So we talk about the resources in National Heritage Areas. And it's really, I think, hard for people to sometimes see what's in their own communities as being beneficial and being something that is amazing for other people to come and see. Here we have two different types of natural resources. So in this picture, I hope you can see the bristlecone pine at the top in the Great Basin National Heritage Area. That's pretty much, it's not everywhere. It's only in these limited locations. And the Great Basin happens to tell how important that natural long-term geologic history is into this area. It also talks about the farming community that grew up there. So it's really an interwoven story of the natural resources and the economic development and how that develops and keeps that sense of community and pride in that area. Sacramento San Joaquin River, the Delta area out there in California. It's relatively new. It's a National Heritage Area that was just designated in 2019. But they're really working hard to tell that story of what that watershed is. How is that preserving? How is that keeping the landscape together? How are those stories from generations and generations being shared and being told in that area? Then we have built cultural resources. So these two happen to be in my region, and they both tell the music story. We have on the left the Fame Recording Studios, which is in Muscle Shoals. And this is the one where Respect was actually recorded. And you have this great story about the whole Muscle Shoals Swampers, and you hear about the music that came out of this location in the 60s and 70s. And next to it, that picture is from Mississippi Delta National Heritage Area at Stockery Farms. It's considered to be the birthplace of the blues. And as you are listening to that, as you're listening to the blues and you're visiting that place, you get that sense of why that music is so important to the landscape and the landscape to the music and how they developed. And you really can understand why these places help tell that story. The next is archaeological resources. So this is from Northern Plains National Heritage Area. It is, you can see in the foreground, you have the people who are very proud, and they have been doing a dig out there, archaeological dig. You can see the little people behind them. They're doing a ton of research to try to tell what this place was. What were these stories? What were these Native American villages like in this part of the world? And they've worked together to make sure that that story is not only shared, but shared with the tribe's understanding and community involvement. And I think, again, one of the things we really want to make sure is that the stakeholders who are telling the story are involved. This is another type of cultural resource. It's the Rivers of Steel, which tells an industrial story. So earlier we had the music story, which is really cultural. Rivers of Steel talks about that steel, the grand age of steel, where everything in Pittsburgh came from the steel industry, and how do they tell that, and what do they do there? And I think that's a really important story. And they actually still have a a fire festival where they take molten steel and they put it into molds, and they're sharing that culture and that history. Because while we might not be making steel there, people don't want to forget what this industrious story is and how it shaped that culture. And another type of resource. So the next couple of slides I'm going to actually talk about folkways or lifeways. They're things that people may not think of as resources, but they're stories that communities use to keep themselves connected. And so this is music. Music is important. And we have many national heritage areas that have music as a theme because music is different in so many different parts of the country. It's defined by what the landscape is. It's defined by the people who lived there. It's defined by maybe the hills and hollers, or maybe it's the flat openness. And we really want to make sure that when national heritage areas are going through their process of a feasibility study, they look at all of these options. So the next slide is resources like Rivers of Steel have the Ukrainian eggs. It's an art history that's part of their life. And art is another thing that we do look at. We also talk about food. So Sangre de Cristo is tells the mix of cultures of the Native Americans and the Spanish and all of the different people who kind of came together in that area. And the fry bread is a part of that story. And I think that I have yet to visit a heritage area that doesn't somewhere tell me about their foodways. And then lastly, we talk about education and we talk about recreation. So the top picture in here is actually a blacksmith who is giving a program at Cane River National Heritage Area. Cane River is in northwest Louisiana. And it's an interesting place because it talks about the area that's been, oldest city in Louisiana. Don't let New Orleans fool you. And what they do there is they really explore that idea of this French community that also evolved with a Spanish community and a Native American community. And it was actually considered part of no man's land for a while, where no European country actually claimed it. And they tell these amazing stories. They tell these stories about how that is a culture that has kept Northwest Louisiana still what it is. And then the bottom picture is a picture of kayaking, and that's at the Schuylkill River, and they have amazing recreation. So before I go on, Eric, are you able to communicate now? I'm going to guess no. So in order to go through the process of becoming a national heritage area, we have feasibility studies. And so a feasibility study has a couple ways of going there, but what they are is they engage local organizations and stakeholders in the conversation. So it's not necessarily somebody comes in and says, here's your story, what you're going to tell the world. It really comes from the people who live there, who engage there, who recreate, who educate, all of the people that are in those communities. We want you all to come together and tell us, what is your community story? It's the future of their resources. What do you want your area to be? What do you want the quality of life to be? It's inventory and assessing the nationally important resources. And so, as I said, most communities don't even realize what they have until they start doing these activities. You look at the National Register, you look at national natural landmarks, national historic landmarks, but you also look at what are the stories that we tell? What are the ways that our community comes together? What are some of the things we can go touch? What are some of the things that aren't there? What are species that are maybe only found in this area? Who's going to be involved? What are some of the opportunities that if you create this national heritage area that you would be giving to the people? It's really important to promote, if you're going to have a feasibility study, to make sure you get as many people to give you input as possible. And we say that because at the end of a successful feasibility study, we hope that you get designated by Congress and then you start a management plan, and you want to already have a group of stakeholders who are involved, who care, who want to continue doing this project. The other thing on a feasibility study is that you make sure that you have commitments from other people, or well, not commitments, I should say, that you have in commitments from other people like the State Historic Preservation Office or local governments that say, you know what, we're okay with this, because they're going to become your supporters and they're going to become your advocates. And throughout this process, I'm not saying it's easy. I don't want people to think that, but it is something that comes along with hard work. And I think it's very valuable. But having those people who champion you throughout the process is important. And then lastly, you would make sure that you had and identify who the management entity might be and what are some of the ways that you would get funding. Management entities, I don't have this in here right now. Management entities are the groups that kind of run things on the ground. And so it could be this organization, it could be a small nonprofit that already has tentacles throughout the community. It could be somebody who's a state organization. It could be a university. We have all of those in the system, and it really just depends on what the community thinks would be the best outcome. It's not designated by the National Park Service again. We work with whoever. And so here's the criteria I think we went through. We talked about the assemblage of resources, making sure that you can talk about all of those different things, that it's, you know, part of the American landscape. It reflects the traditions, the customs, the beliefs, and the folk life. You provide outstanding opportunities for conservation, recreation, education, historic preservation. The resources have a relatively high degree of integrity that can actually still be told. So you're not talking about, you know, everything that is rusted into the ground and you can only see like the top little piece of something. You want to make sure that you've got resources that people can identify and see, even if there's nobody there all the time. And then we want to see it be a partnership. I mean, we're in the partnership, we're a partnership arm of the Park Service. We want to make sure that happens, that you see all these different stakeholders coming together, that they're willing to work together with the local governments, with the whoever or whatever stakeholder groups there are. We do ask that there is a boundary map at the end of a feasibility study, conceptual. It does not have to be finalized, but that whatever's in that boundary map is actually supported by the resources that you identify, and that you have a group that is identified. And those are the criteria. And then that's the end of my presentation. So it's a quick overview. I realize that. I probably didn't go through everything. Just really quickly, the other thing is that I think in a feasibility study, it can either be done locally by an organization and they generate all the information, they do the proposal together. You can also ask Congress to have the National Park Service do it. But again, that takes a bill from Congress to say, hey, Park Service, go do this study. And it's at least a 3-year process with us. If you ask Congress to do it and the Park Service does it, there is no cost really to the organization. If you choose to do it on your own, there is a cost to your organization, but you can probably do it faster than we can.
Okay. Thank you so much, Elisa. So there was a question that came up in the chat from Connie Carpenter at the Forest Service, and she asked, what is the range and size of heritage areas? And Eric responded, can be a few city blocks to a whole state. So that's quite a range.
Yeah, I think our smallest we figured out this week was 30 square blocks. And our largest is the state of Tennessee.
Wow. Okay. That's a range. Well, thank you so much. Eric, I don't know if you're able, I think you're still having issues, but if you wanted to pipe up and add anything, and we do want to turn over to Lois for a few minutes before we take questions, but are you able to chime in, Eric? Okay. Sorry, you're having trouble. So I think maybe we'll turn it over to Lois then at this point, and then we'll take comments and questions from board members. But Lois, if you're able to just kind of share a little bit of your perspective as a director of one of these areas, and maybe some things that that this group can think about as they're considering this as an option.
Yeah, so we've been around since 1994. This is our 30th anniversary this year. In fact, we're going to have a big party on November 2nd because that's the actual date of our designation 30 years ago. Back then, the landscape looked very different, not our physical landscape, but the political landscape. We were the 4th heritage area in the country, and the National Park Service had a very different role. We were very much focused on our congressional delegation. Our grassroots people had heard of this concept. In fact, the Blackstone National Heritage Corridor had been designated to our east. It was a different watershed. And there was a lot of congressional support for it from our leaders. And because we didn't have a National Park Service site within our borders, many heritage areas do. Today, many of them also don't. It's very variable. We didn't have a direct relationship with the National Park Service. We were designated by Congress. And in those early days, we would get a check once our individual line item was determined. The money would come to us once or twice a year. So it was a very different system. And at some point, as more and more heritage areas were created, because people understood that the public-private partnerships that they represented were important and critical, and actually allowed the National Park Service to do more and reach more people and tell more stories, that public-private partnership became more and more important. More heritage areas were designated. At some point, we understand, basically the budget offices in Congress said, we're done with all these line items. We're going to put you all administratively under the National Park Service. And our contract started to run then through the National Park Service. But because we didn't have a site, we actually had a contracting officer in Rhode Island for a while. And then it got moved around. We had Boston, and now we have Philly, and we have Eric now. So we have a long history. And it's wonderful to hear the Park Service now talking in glowing terms about the whole concept of the National Heritage Areas. Because honestly, in the early days, it was hands off. We don't know who this nonprofit is or what they're doing, but they can't use our logo because we don't have any control over them. Things have evolved so much now that it is definitely much more of a partnership with the National Park Service, and it benefits us all. So our legislation, and let me give you the mouthful. Our purpose is to develop and implement integrated natural, cultural, historic, scenic, recreational, land, and other resource management programs in order to retain, enhance, and interpret the significant features of the lands, water, structures, and history of the Quinebaug-Shattucket Rivers Valley. Woo, that's a lot. We were created in eastern Connecticut, south central Massachusetts. We are the major chunk of the Quinebaug-Shattucket River watersheds. In fact, our original name, when we were first designated back in 1994, was the Quinebaug-Shattucket Rivers Valley National Heritage Corridor. Nobody could see it. Nobody could spell it. Nobody could remember it. And at some point, and this was all prior to me coming on board, people started using the name the Last Green Valley.
Oh.
Evidently, it is from a pilot's perspective. If they're flying from Boston through Washington, D.C., down to Philly, through New York City, down to Philly, down to Washington, we are a dark notch in the flight path. And we're very distinctive because we are so rural. We are surprisingly rural, probably 84% forest and farm, surrounded by Worcester, Providence, Hartford, many, heavily populated areas, and within striking distance, clearly, of New York and Boston. So the Last Green Valley kind of stuck. And at some point, our legislation was amended and we became the Last Green Valley National Heritage Corridor. We cover 35 towns, 26 in eastern Connecticut, 9 in south central Massachusetts, right over the border. Our Massachusetts towns are Brimfield, East Brookfield, Sturbridge, Southbridge, Oxford, Charlton, Webster, that area. And all of the Connecticut towns that are right on the border with Rhode Island. A lot of what we do is natural resource conservation. We do tell a lot of historic and cultural stories but we are not as concentrated, if you will, as some of the heritage areas. Some of the heritage areas are very specific in their time frame, in the stories that they tell, like a battlefield. Heritage areas that it evolved to tell battlefield stories, or the Erie Canal, or something like that, where they have a real specific story. Ours is much broader. We have always worked with many, many partners and tried to tell a wide variety of historic and cultural stories. We do a lot of natural resource protection, things like water quality monitoring, forest conservation. We also do a lot of outdoor education. We bring a lot of people outdoors and introduce them, including a lot of kids, to natural resources. So for example, we have lots of partner organizations we work with. One of them is called Horizon Wings. They're a raptor rehabilitation facility. So we'll get grants and we'll fund Horizon Wings to come and meet with kids, school kids or scouts or whatever it is, with their bald eagles, with their owls. So we do a lot of those kinds of programs. We have a lot of volunteers. One of the things that's important with heritage areas, it's across the board. We all have to match the federal dollars. For us, it's 1-to-1. I think most of them are 1-to-1, right? Yeah. Some didn't have that match requirement in their original legislation, but the new program legislation, right, is now requires it 1-to-1. And one of the ways you can do that is with in-kind contributions. So it's not all just cash coming in the door. A lot of it is, for us, is volunteer participation. And in fact, last year, we had, because of all the programs that we run in the region, we had 2,878 volunteers. And the good thing is that we use the independent sector. It's another nonprofit who figures out volunteer rates. The Massachusetts rate for volunteer labor is $39.19 an hour. That is a great way to work on your matching contribution. If you were to become a heritage area, it is one of those things that you would actually have to be able to do from the beginning, is to be able to kind of match a federal dollar 1-to-1 with the non-federal contributions. So, right from the gate, it's something that you have to be able to do. So many things I could talk about. I should probably just let people ask questions. We've been at this a long time. We've seen lots of changes in the Park Service. We're very excited. As Lisa mentioned, we had a big piece of program legislation that was signed in January of this past year, 2023, which established us as a part of the National Park Service system. It authorizes federal funding for us through 2037. Now, it doesn't guarantee funding in any particular year. Even though we have this longer term authorization, we have to go through the appropriations process every single year. It is difficult, especially with continuing resolutions that are continually extended again and again and again, to have a lot of certainty in your budgeting. One of the things I've heard from other people who are seeking to become heritage areas, and even among Alliance, other heritage areas that we work with, is that if you want to do this for the money and solely the dollars, you probably should not do it solely for the federal dollars. It's important to really believe in your region and to tell the important stories and create that regional identity. And if all those things happen and you get the designation and the federal dollars on top of it, awesome. But don't undertake this process because you think that the heritage area program is the only way to go. It is a long process. Like Elisa mentioned, we know quite a few groups that have been at this for 10 years without getting a designation. So it's an investment in time. On the other hand, once you become a heritage area, there are all kinds of benefits because it just elevates the profile of everything that you're doing. And and it gives you a sort of a credibility and a stronger voice at the table in so many contexts. So there's a lot of good that comes out of the designation. Money is one of them, but don't do it just because of that. Do it for other reasons, so that would be my advice. One of the things that I want to mention is that the Alliance of National Heritage Areas is a terrific organization. I'll put the website link in the chat. The Alliance is very welcoming of groups that are interested in becoming heritage areas. You are welcome to attend board meetings, to listen in on calls. They run a series of what they call best practice calls once a month on all kinds of topics. Lots of programs like that are done virtually are open to everyone. And there are quite a few members of the Alliance who are emerging heritage areas, those that are working towards their designation. I think there's 5 or 6 that actually pay dues. I think it's like $275-ish. That's about the ballpark level for groups that are interested in becoming a part of the Alliance and learning more. The Alliance members can provide all kinds of support from heritage areas who have just gotten designated within the last year. In that big program comprehensive legislation, there were 7 new heritage areas designated. So they are members of the Alliance. And I know that they're all very giving of their time and would be great people to talk to. We went through this so long ago that my experience here is very different from the experience of the people who have just gotten designated. They're the ones that we really need to connect you to if you want to pursue this a little, in more depth. And I'd be happy to do that to help make those connections. So let me stop there. I've been talking
Thank
too
you so
long.
much,
Let me
Lois.
take questions. I know there's questions in the chat. I can't see them fast enough though. Let me see what's here.
Okay, so there was a question about a guidebook that describes the
Eric?
process, and Eric
Yep.
says, yes, there is. And I know Kate has already been dipping in a little bit to some of the resources online. And there's a link, Eric, or Lisa provided an FAQ on their website and a toolkit.
Yep.
Let's see, Russ notes, it was interesting to see dollar per hour value for volunteer participation.
Yep.
And then Eric shared the most important work that goes on is organizing at the beginning of the process, the recognition of important local resources, a community's unique story, formulation of a plan involving all parts of the community, and how to protect those resources and carry on the heritage through each generation. And that was from testimony to Congress. And Connie's asking about, suppose information is available on the Park Service website about national outreach. And then there's a question about interpretive training. Does the Park Service provide that? And I'll
Yes.
stop
Over the
reading
years,
there, but people can speak up too if they like.
yeah, over the years we have been invited and able to take advantage of more and more Park Service resources than we were in the early years. We can tell you there's still some issues because we can't, as nonprofits, we don't have access to Park Service shared drives and Park Service things. So there's some bugs that still have to get worked out, but we're now on more internal Park Service mailing lists and opportunities for training. And so that's definitely been a benefit of a closer working relationship. Yeah.
So I think, Connie, you mentioned Forest Service. We are the entire Park Service is a fee service for interpretation training.
Oh,
It's-
okay.
It's not something, unless you can get into a few select classes, but it's pretty much you have to pay to go to training on interpretation.
Okay. Yeah, but
At least we see the announcements
good
now.
at it.
We share the announcements with
We
everybody.
share them all. Yeah.
But we still have a fee for everybody, so.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Eric. All right. Elaine, you had your hand up.
Yes, I had a couple of questions about the funding. So it sounds like if you wanted to go the long route, you can have Congress do a feasibility study, but that most folks, is there some sense, obviously, I would guess it would depend on the size of the area, but to do a good feasibility study, is there some sense of how much that would cost? Because I imagine a group of volunteers is still gonna spend tens of thousands of dollars to do a good one that's going to be presentable. And then my other question is the funding that's supporting the nonprofit once it's established. It sounded like from Lois that that is a regular thing, or is that something you have to like advocate for every year to Congress? Or how does that work? The match that you would get from the feds?
You do have to advocate for it every year. So you're authorized to get the money, but you actually don't get the money until Congress actually passes a budget bill. And so there's a lot of lobbying that goes on the Hill. Lois mentioned the Alliance. They go to Washington, D.C. every year in February, and they meet with all their congressional legislations. We recently had that meeting. And so that's an opportunity for them to, talk to the, what kind of funding is necessary or needed and the reasons why. I would say we provide technical assistance on a lot of different things, including invasive plants. Elise is right. We're not training interpreters, but we do work closely with Park Service units. So generally we'll tie an NHA to a nearby NPS park site. And so there's a lot of coordination between interpreters going on there. So the same stories are told, or there's new things involved, and new ways, like the 250th. So I know a lot of the A250, a lot of our parks are working closely with our NHAs on that.
And
Yeah,
I was going to
Yeah.
just say for the story on the very first question about how much it cost. I just finished I am working with a group in the Florida Panhandle. They are saying somewhere around 70 to 80,000, but they had a college, they had a university involved who did a lot of the study. And it's a lot of counties in the Florida Panhandle that are not always easy to get to. And that was also something, it's great to have a big heritage area. It's great to have a small heritage area. Just think about the ground you have to cover to talk to all the stakeholders.
Yeah. And let me make one more comment on the political side of things. I was down in Washington, D.C. for the Alliance meeting, and we set up meetings with Richie Neal's office, Jim McGovern's office, at Markey's office, and Senator Warren's office, as well as Blumenthal Murphy and Joe Courtney on the House side. So we were just there. We go in, we meet with the staff. We don't always see the senators or reps themselves sometimes, but we give them all our materials. We thank them for their support. Massachusetts and Connecticut delegation have been incredibly supportive. If ever there were a time to ask their support for help with a new designation, now would be it, because they've got seniority, particularly on the Senate side, and they're very attuned to the heritage areas. Massachusetts is unusual because there's so many heritage areas in the state. You have Last Green Valley has 9 Massachusetts towns. Upper Housatonic National Heritage Area. Dan Bolognani is the executive director. They're almost the mirror image of us in Massachusetts. They have more Massachusetts towns and a couple in Connecticut out on the western border. They include like Stockbridge, Red Lion, and Red Lion. In fact, we were there in the fall at the Red Lion Inn in Stockbridge. They include Greylock. They include quite a few resources. Plus, we have the Blackstone Heritage Corridor, which is to our east, which is the Blackstone River watershed in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Plus, there's Essex National Heritage Area up on the North Shore of Massachusetts. And we also have Freedom's Way National Heritage Area, which is kind of the Concord, Lexington corridor, plus farther west and a little bit into New Hampshire. So our congressional delegation is well aware of and has been, again, very supportive because of all the work that we're doing and how much briefing we do with them. So it's a really good time to get in and see them.
Chris Skelly has his hand raised.
Hi, I think it's just a question on just crossing state lines and what your sense is from somebody, I don't, whether it's Lois or somebody else, just a question,
We're going through.
likelihood of
Yeah.
success if you're not crossing state lines. Because I mean, with Last Green, Housatonic, even Freedom's Way goes into New Hampshire.
Yep, New Hampshire.
I mean, there's definitely something there in terms of hitting a number of congressional districts.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter. What matters is the community support and how that community support is conveyed to the delegation that you work with. Because I only have one in the entire Southeast that crosses state lines.
Okay.
It's a common thing in New England,
'Cause
but it's not common across the National Park Service.
when we were first designated, we were only 25 towns in Connecticut. That was 1994. 5 years later, 9 Massachusetts towns were added and 1 more Connecticut town. So, and I don't know how, honestly, how that happened or why they decided to join. One of the things we did get was we had every town sign something indicating their assent to become part of the Heritage Corridor. But we were trying to encompass more of the watershed. You know, it was the major rivers, and all of these towns are within the watersheds. So it made sense to add them, but I don't know why they weren't included the first time around. You know, that part of the history is lost.
Elaine has her hand up. Oh, you're muted, Elaine. Yep.
Just curious about pushback from communities or groups when these efforts are being made. You know, I mean, you know, just whether it's the federal, you know, the idea of the feds coming in, or whether it's a tax base issue, which we're all sensitive to that up here in Western Mass. I'm just curious in any of these experiences.
Well, certainly our original legislation and now the program legislation that was just passed makes it clear that Park Service dollars cannot be used to purchase property. And in part, this is done to alleviate concerns that there's any kind of a federal land grab or anything like that. You know, it's also very clear, we have no regulatory authority whatsoever. And none of the heritage areas in the Northeast have, I don't know if any of them do around the country. I don't think so. I don't think there's any heritage area that has any kind of land use authority. So between no regulatory authority and no ability to, purchase property with the Park Service funds, we have not faced those issues in New England very much. I do know in other parts of the country, Montana, for example, there's been a very difficult fight where people are against the heritage area because they really think this is too much federal government intrusion. We try to stress our economic development synergy, you know, that we can help the region grow economically while conserving cultural natural resources. So I think there's a strong, in fact, we had an economic impact study done years ago. And, you know, when they looked at the multipliers, they're huge for the amount of economic output we could generate from all the different programs that we ran. It was almost a decade ago. So the numbers don't make as much sense anymore now, but there's a real economic opportunity with heritage areas.
I will say there is an organization that continuously tries to tell the world how awful heritage areas are. However, with every time we hear that, we counter with heritage areas can't own land. We don't have any regulatory authority.
Right.
And it's been diminishing over the last, I would say, 2 years, except in that Montana thing. And that's a weird situation. I'll be honest.
So any other last questions or comments? We are going over a little bit, but I think this is a really important conversation, so.
Can we
Art-
answer Melanie really
Yeah,
quick?
Sure, and then I think Art had his hand up too, but go ahead.
Melanie, we are great with state land. We don't, as long as they're one of your stakeholders, they're one of your partners. I don't, most of the heritage areas that I work with, in some case, in somewhere, have state land that are partners. I'm thinking of Arabia Mountain, which is 20 minutes from me in Atlanta. They work with the local parkland, which is DeKalb County, and they have a reserve. They have state land, which is Panola Mountain, which is a national natural landmark. And then they work with the Monastery of the Holy Spirit, which is honestly, I forgot, a Franciscan order, I believe. And they're all partners in telling the story of the Monadnocks here in Georgia. So it really is just a matter of who is going to be your stakeholders. We don't pick, we don't care. As long as there's somebody that's good for your organization, that's your choice.
Yeah, and in fact, our first management plan way back when was written by employees of the state of Connecticut. So we have good relationships, and we've done quite a few projects with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Bob O'Connor, especially when he was up at the executive office, EOEA, we worked on a mega project with him. So in fact, we had a meeting, right? I had a meeting today with Connecticut Deep. We're actually talking about potentially hosting even more programs with them and kind of establishing more of a permanent location on a state property, which would be a really interesting opportunity for us. Very preliminary. So we have really good relationships with the state. And in fact, if we can get state grants, they match the federal dollars, which is really nice. We also, our biggest federal landowner in our corridor is the Army Corps of Engineers. And we run programs with them all the time. We can't, because of the federal dollar, we don't match anything back and forth with them because kind of our federal dollars versus their federal dollars, we can't do. But they give us the code to be able to get in their gates at night to run night sky programs, and they will host a lot of programs with us. So we have very good relationships with all the state and the federal agency that's out here.
And Art Schwenger, you had your hand up?
Well, actually, I set my question in the chat there, but basically I was just curious whether or not, I mean, the Woodlands Partnership is working and has been working very closely with the National Forest Service. And I was curious whether there are any issues we should be aware of while working with two different state agencies that are federal agencies. I don't know how well they work together, but is there any problem or issue that we should be aware of?
I can tell you that every agency has its own language. You know, the hardest part is actually deciphering the language and learning them both. Park Service has its own language too.
Everybody does.
That you have to learn.
Yeah.
But
Multilingual exercise. Huh?
But
And what you already
again, because
know.
you wouldn't be able to match a Forest Service project to Park Service dollars because you can't match federal to federal. But
Right.
other than that, we've done projects with the Forest Service too. So
I see Connie unmuted for a minute, so maybe she wants to add something.
Oh,
Can I-
no,
can I add
Lois
something?
got it. Lois got it. That way I was just saying, you can't match federal with federal.
I was going to add, though, that we do have other federal programs that are granting organizations within the Park Service that you can get federal grants for those too, right? You don't have to be an NHA to do that, but there are federal grants available.
But we
Um,
do give a little extra bump to our NHAs for some of the programs because we already know they
Yeah.
know how to work with us. And I
Yep.
will tell you that when you come in with, like, if you have gotten a grant, we'll say from US Forest Service or US Army Corps of Engineers or NOAA, and you can show us that really helps because we know you understand what federal funding is. We know you know our language in terms of the laws, and we know that you have already been trustworthy with federal funding and spent it the right way. And guess what? All of our systems talk to each other, so we know that. It's not like it's not like Connie at Forest Services puts this information in a vault that nobody ever sees. And so we do kind of, it's actually beneficial, I think, if you work with another agency that the others can find out about it.
Right, and I just want to note that Rhonda from the Ocotillo Cultural Center has just commented, I'd be interested in the possibility of making sure that the tribal nations along the Route 2 corridor or Deerfield Pecumtuck River are telling their stories of this area and not the current misinformed representation. So
And I don't know if
Agreed.
we want tribal involvement is really important.
Yep. Yes.
We ran into this the last year with one of our new NHAs, and the tribes had comments, and of course the draft management plan went forward, but the comments weren't addressed. So we recognize that, that is a big failure, right? And so we want to work towards not having that happen. And it delayed this NHA from getting a bump up in funding over $350,000. So just that delay in and of itself. So, but yes, early and often, and definitely tribal consultation. We want all stakeholders involved, descendant groups as well. So, I mean, that's what we're going to be looking for in that feasibility study, that people, if there's dissenting views, letters of support showing, or letters of dissent, and how you address comments, how you reviewed, how you track comments, all of those things are important. And if we get to that stage, we have an onboarding sessions that we give each NHA. So they're monthly onboarding sessions to help them through that plan.
Poor Lois. She didn't have any of all this background.
I know. I know.
well, thank you all so much for taking your time to share with the board your different perspectives on the heritage areas. Dickon, I don't know if you want to say anything else here. We are kind of running behind now on the agenda, but I'll throw it to you for what you want to do.
Just thank you very much. And we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye all.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us. And I'm
Thanks.
welcome to, I'm happy to spend as much time. People can come visit us, to talk, or we can connect you to other people that have gone through this process more recently, which may be more helpful too. So happy to help in the future too.
We will be in touch. So thank
All
you
right.
so much,
Yeah.
Lois
Thanks.
and Eric and Elisa.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. I look forward to it.
Okay, take care. So, so we do have another item on the agenda, actually, where we could vote on this if there's interested in doing that tonight, but we also probably don't need to rush it. So I'll let Dickon decide if he wants to go forward with the item on the agenda. And Kate, I think, do you have that on a slide that you could share? We have queued this up because we do have some funding to start a study in an extension of the agent contract that I was going to share in my update. But I believe it's $47,000 in the extended contract with EEA that the agent has, that we could start work on this and kind of continue investigating what is needed to do one of these feasibility studies. So, yeah.
I do not have
Okay.
it on the slide. I just have the words from the agenda. So board discussion and vote, if you want to go down that path, which would be an authorization for agent staff to pursue National Heritage Area designation and research best strategy for completing required feasibility study. So this would be a vote for us to starting.
Right. I think we discussed this earlier, and whether to bring this to the board right away or whether to hold off, and with the idea that we would end up with more information down the road. But my thought was that there is a sense that this is a good time. I think that was mentioned, and that we have some resources that we can invest in this now. So it strikes me is we should discuss and vote on this now. If the board doesn't think that we're ready to do it, so be it. But I think it's worth having a discussion and then a vote. Yes, sir.
Well, I'd like to discuss it just a little bit. I'm very much in favor, I think, of at least exploring further to see whether or not this really is appropriate for us or not. But one of the questions that I would want to know before voting for that is whether this activity of exploration and even spending the money, whether it displaces our other activities and objectives at this point, or whether it's on top of all that stuff in terms of staff support, particularly.
I think, Lisa, you could probably answer that better than I.
Yeah, it's a good question. Through the EEA agent, it's just been extended through December 2025, and there was some additional funding there to, included for this topic specifically. But there is just the ongoing workload of supporting all the standing committees, trying to identify program priorities. Kate and I are managing 2 or 3 different grants, both from the U.S. Forest Service and some state grants as well, that kind of keep us hopping just in terms of doing, those deliverables and all the budgeting and the reports that are required for federal grants. So we're pretty busy already. So we probably would have to look at bringing on some additional capacity. Maybe it could be a consultant part-time or something focused on this, or Kate and I have been talking about if she would want to kind of take on the study, which, we realize that we have probably some of the pieces already in the 10-year plan, because a lot of time went into that over the course of a year, including maps and a lot of statistics about the region. So some of those nuts and bolts are there, but we would probably have to do another sort of stakeholder process to move this forward. So we need to probably dig in a little more to know exactly how much money it's going to cost and what we can do with existing capacity. And Kate, please, if you want to add to that, because you've been looking at.
I would say that, like, the idea of hiring someone to work on this who hasn't been involved in it already seems like it could be good, or it could be better just to have it be people who kind of know what's going on already. So if people agreed with that, Lisa and I would probably, and I would primarily, because I work more hours than Lisa on this, work on the feasibility study. So I would have less time for other things. But maybe the money from EEA, and I don't know, maybe Bob could speak to this, if there's money allocated for the plan, could that money funnel towards me instead of the other money, and then the other money, cross, and then we could have that money go towards maybe some more programming or other board priorities. I don't know, Bob, is that possible, or?
Yeah, no, I think it's flexible. While we were, amending the agent contract so it could extend a little longer, and there was extra money added to cover the extra time with Lisa and Kate and other expenses. But it seemed like a good opportunity to ask if they would be willing to spend additional money beyond extending the current activities to do this. So yeah, I think you could do it any way you want, but it's just extra resources to do that. So, I'm always trying to move everything maybe too fast, but I think, just the vote to authorize looking into it seems like it, it's not a bad thing if the staff looks into it more. And I looked at the difference between the management plan that you already have and the feasibility study, and there's a lot of the management plan covers a lot of the stuff that's in the feasibility, but there are a few areas, like Lisa said, there would probably need to be a specific outreach for this. But yeah, I don't
think-
see any harm in pursuing it.
Well,
and
what I would
not-
be concerned with, just personally, because I've looked into it a lot, like if the wording of the vote is only to look into it further, or is it to actually start attempting to do it as a way of looking into it? Like, I would want
The-
some specificity around that.
The motion that's in the agenda, I mean, there is the works of a motion in the agenda here that says we would vote to authorize the agent staff to pursue National Heritage Area designation and research best strategy for completing a required feasibility study. That sounds like an initiation, not a commitment at that point to me. I don't know. What is that? Yeah, Liz?
I'll make a motion as written on the agenda, because we should
I'll
really
second
have a
the motion.
motion and then discuss it. And then I have something I want to say.
Okay, well, I'll second the motion.
Okay,
Okay,
Is there discussion?
So-
You got to call for further discussion.
discussion. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
something.
All right,
It's
just
been-
real quickly, you might want to consider striking pursue and using the word explore or investigate. My comment.
I think to Kate's point, pursue suggests that the effort is going to accomplish some of the goals required, where investigate would just say we're going to look at it, but our effort won't necessarily be functional or accomplishing. I kind of like pursue in that that you kind of have some deliverables toward the goal associated with that term, where investigate doesn't really suggest that you are going to accomplish anything. You're just going to decide whether you want to accomplish something. And that would be a big effort to eventually say, well, we explored it and decided not to do it. I think that's what this vote is about. Are we committed enough to pursue this, or do we just want to investigate this? I think that word is, or those two words,
Sure.
need to be.
Oh, sorry, both Liz and Elaine have wanted to speak, so just reminding.
Well, I think that, well, A, we have a few new board members on, and B, we haven't really talked about this in detail a lot. So I feel like maybe we need to step back and think about, after what we just heard and the information about natural heritage areas, what our theme is, what our region is, I think just using the partnership shapes, to me, doesn't make sense. So I guess, if we can maybe start with that, as where and what are we thinking of? Is it based on geography? Is it based on the towns that have voted in here? Is it based on the Deerfield River, which we're also pursuing, not we, but it is being pursued as the wild and scenic designation. So I guess I wouldn't mind stepping back and just kind of starting a little bit more at the beginning with what was that thought? What's the region? What are we thinking about before we vote to actually do it, which is what that board vote is saying.
yeah, what I was going to be saying was that I can't help, and I'm a former regional planner. I look at the slide presentation and I see Western Mass, not just the Woodland Partnership, because you're talking about art and that rate and history. And why does the things stop at the edge of the Woodlands Partnership, the 21 towns? I'm sure that Rhonda would have things that would cover all of Western Mass. There's Pecumtuck Valley, there's historic Deerfield, there's the Berkshires with all the arts. Jacob's Pillow, Tanglewood, Hancock Shaker Museum. To me, that would be a much stronger application in terms of the federal government looking at it. that we could add so much more to the application. Then Lois, was that her name? From last Green Valley, mentioned that they started with a smaller number of towns and then expanded. So I think that that's one of the things that should be covered in looking at a feasibility study. You know, I made the motion, and I'm happy to leave pursue in there, because my expectation is that there's so much advantage to this, and that it's a good thing, but there's still a lot of things to look at, especially as Elaine brought up the boundary and what are we talking about? And to me, that's part of the feasibility study.
I'll just note too that,
Larry had his hand up too.
yeah, I was just gonna note that the Housatonic, there is a Housatonic area too that kind of does include some of the things that were mentioned. So yeah, the geography is something we'd have to probably look closer at, but.
I think one of the things that distinguishes the partnership area, and maybe the exact boundary is different than the adopted boundary of the 21 towns, but it's what is distinct about it is that one, it's if you look at a map, it's largely forested. There's not a lot of agricultural valley land as there is in more southern Berkshire County or the Connecticut Valley. So it's distinct in that sense. I think it is also somewhat distinct in the amount of already conserved land in this area. So one of the things that caused the partnership to develop through the steering committee was how do we, in an area that has already got a lot of conservation land, keep our communities viable, our tax bases adequate, and have some kind of rural development focus to keep jobs and our families in our communities, and not everybody just rushing to somewhere else. And I think that those are aspects that were clearly mentioned in the presentation on what a natural heritage area hopes to accomplish. So I do think there is some things that distinguish, what we are calling the partnership area. There may be a few other towns that fit into that, but I think there is something distinct about that corner. You go further east and you get into the Connecticut Valley. You go further south, you get into the more agricultural and much more affluent southern Berkshire area. So including, say, all Western Mass, it really is going to dilute the issues that are, I think, really important to the partnership area as it is. And I think there is something distinct about it, and that I think from the very beginning, we felt we needed to express to the rest of the state and the region that we bring, a lot of ecosystem services to a much broader area than we actually. It's not like the ecosystem services just benefit us, and we really aren't necessarily compensated for it, but we're also not really recognized for it. And I don't think we really found a way for economic development to thrive as a result of this. So, so for that reason, I sort of think there is a reason to keep it focused kind of the way it is, as opposed to be all of Western Mass.
I think, Dick, and you make some good points there, but it's also important to remember that a big reason this got started is because there's more landowners who are interested in conservation of their lands. That is a big economic driver in our area. It doesn't stop development. We know that the land that's conserved is what supports the development land around and makes it work. So I think we need to move forward with this. I think it's a good idea. The feasibility study can certainly define what the region is. I think there's good points to make it smaller or to make it larger, but I think we need to vote and go forward with it the way it's written and see what Kate finds out.
So Mary Beth and Chris. Where did Mary Beth go? There she is. You had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry about that. Had to, forgot I was
okay.
on mute. So I do think that exploration of the pieces that would go into the application are important, because I do agree with the fact that there are other items like the art in this area, like the tributaries. Even though the Connecticut is farther south, we have potential partnership towns that have rivers running through them that lead to and are part of the watershed. So I think we should evaluate and encompass as much as we can. That's not to say we have to expand the area to do that. We can just choose to focus on those items within the area that we have.
Chris? Oh, you're unmuted.
There we go.
I-
Sorry.
But I sworn I just pushed. I pushed it, but it didn't work. Okay, got it.
I guess there's one other question that I guess this raises for me, and that is our objective. One of our major objectives originally was to have a fund, have money in a trust fund that would keep the partnership operating. And since we haven't gotten that so far, I suppose it makes a lot of sense to get grants and that sort of thing, which provide administrative support. But I would hate to put all our energy or a lot more of our energy into the heritage area and not continue to pursue the development of this, federal designation and the trust fund.
So Art, one point to that is that the match required to the federal dollars would ideally maybe give us some leverage to get continued support from EEA in at least the short term if we were to get this designation or another type of state support to match it. And I think that working on the trust fund language can happen concurrently, but I think we have to kind of leverage funding where it's been coming from historically as well.
Understand. Thank you.
Chris, you had something to say.
Chris Kelly.
Yeah, I think as long as our motion here is general enough, I'm supportive of pursuing this further. So I think when it comes to these, there's really a push-pull in terms of the area, how big it's going to be, and that's partly based on what you're using for criteria. I mean, it could be a lot of different criteria that you're using here. It could be forestry, it could be manufacturing. I mean, you could have a heritage area in Western Mass that's just focused on manufacturing. So manufacturing, agriculture, lots of other possibilities there, and why you would have a national heritage area here. So yeah, I think it's really going back and forth in terms of what are you going to use for your founding reasons for having a national heritage area, and that's going to help decide how big it's going to be in the end. So I think it's general enough just to start thinking about what that's going to look like. I think researching it in the motion's good, and just thinking about different scenarios.
just for clarity, would pursuing it involve like outreach to people in the community to get their opinions on what makes our area distinct? Or would that be the next step?
Well, I would just jump in to say, I think we know that's probably going to be part of it, but I would envision coming back to the board periodically, obviously like probably in June, we would be presenting on, okay, this is what we learned and these are the key steps here. I think like probably an outreach and stakeholder process would be something we would have to plan in the near future, but would probably want to get board and executive committee direction on exactly how to go about that. But yeah, it's going to be a learning process for me. I'm sure. Kate, you've already looked into more of the materials.
And I wonder too, like, so the funding for the partnership runs out in December of 25. Feasibility study will probably take a while. So that's just something for the board to keep in mind about how we want to organize our time and how we want to make use of what we have and,
Right. I think it may be the case that we would have to ask for or find additional funding to put this over the finish line if we actually could decide it's a good idea and want to keep going for it.
I think
we would then learn what those costs were. Yeah.
This is Art again. I think the motion sort of implies that one of the objectives would be to determine what the best strategy to moving forward would be, which would include just what you're talking about, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of the work that would be done, particularly outreach related, is stuff that we really should do anyway. I mean, we need to demonstrate, I think, to the partnership community that we are aware of what their needs are and how we can go about helping to provide that. And engaging with stakeholders is a really important piece of doing that, and it's something we should be doing anyway. So I don't think we're being distracted from our mission by doing that kind of thing. I think that is part of our mission. Hi, Liz.
Can I follow up on that? What Art said in terms of, doing the research and what the best strategy is. My experience with committees like this is until you have something in paper to review and comment on, you can spend a lot of times in meetings like this sort of discussing things and going around in circles. So I think we need to have the staff put down the strategy in paper and in writing so we have something to look at. And Larry Flackus has been periodically raising his hand, and I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Thank you. I just wanted to support the concept of moving forward with this, but particularly looking at the towns that are on the edges of the partnership, that there's some great resources there in places like the Harvard Forest and their museum and their experience with dioramas, the Tool Museum in Greenfield, Historic Deerfield has a lifetime of experience with this kind of thing. And the Stockbridge Lennox area has great resources as well. So I think if we're going to go forward with it, we really do need to look at a broader region, not just limited to the partnership towns.
Bob has his hand up.
I kind of want to second what Dickon said. And, I think the presentation about the heritage area, there's a lot of ways you could go with it. And there's so many heritage areas that are, focused on music or all other kind of culture. I think we've worked for so many years to kind of define what the partnership is, and we should just have the heritage area fit into what our priorities are, fine tune it, I guess, rather than you know, look at everything that's being done in these heritage areas and try to see where we should just stick to our kind of mission and focus. And I think that will fit into heritage area. You know, it's kind of like what Dickens said. It's a rural forested area that has, you know, challenges that a lot of other rural forested areas have. And, you know, this is a way to try to get have areas like that thrive more. So I think that's a perfectly good theme to have within the heritage area. So, and I like what the Park Service said about the Forest Service, that they're welcoming, you know, so we can still work with the Forest Service and get their support. And I think it's a good addition if we don't let it divert from what we're doing, but just kind of fold it into what we're doing.
Good point.
I think that's a very good point, Bob, is folding it into what we're doing, which I think the pursuit of a plan, what is the term? Implementation? No, what's
Feasibility
the plan?
study is the first step.
Yeah. I think you know, that what Bob is suggesting is the pursuit of the feasibility study will also be pursuing our goals in our relationships with stakeholders, and we may learn of other opportunities to both create programming out of this pursuit for our area, and but also be able to find that there's ways we can get funding through other things that we learn about as we learn more about our stakeholders and the other aspects of the feasibility study, you know, may lead us to the things that we should be pursuing anyway. I think that's what Bob was saying.
Thank you, Dickon.
Well, there can be a bunch of information to look at in June at the summer meeting that's very specific. That can be prepared for you all. And then if that's, you know, reviewed and acceptable, there can be motion, like, you know, really direct motion occurring after that, potentially.
Well, you know, I think that if I'm hearing what I'm hearing here is there's some people that are feeling like this should be a designation of the partnership region more closely, and then others who are saying this would be great to pursue some of the other great cultural things and historical things that are broader. And so, you know, the board vote that we have here is not specific to say that we're just going to pursue something for the partnership region. But it's clear that this is just the beginning of a conversation about, as the partnership, are we going to pursue something that's just the partnership region, or are we going to be supportive of us pursuing something larger? And so I don't think we've made a conclusion here, but I think that the vote is allowing us to move forward to continue investigating it, and what the shape of it is I think still to be determined, if I hear everybody correctly, and with really good reasons on all sides, honestly, you know, so that's my thoughts.
I think you're right.
Yeah, well, let's go to a vote.
Say, does somebody want to move the question? Yeah.
I don't know that we need, but
I think Liz did.
I'm sure
You have a motion on the table, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the motion?
It's as written in the agenda.
Okay.
And you
I'll
seconded it, Art.
Yeah, I did.
All right.
So all in favor of the motion as written in the agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, it looks like the motion carries.
Well, you might want to ask for abstentions.
Oh, certainly. Are they, any, abstentions?
Or nays.
I think I did ask for the nays.
Yep. Yep.
Looks like it's
But I-
unanimous, so, all right.
Great.
Lisa, next up is Forest Center Space Study, and then we have the chair updates. And the
Okay,
agent update, and there's a lot to do, so let's.
right. I was gonna share my screen and, hold on. Sorry, let me try this again. I don't have that many things open yet. It still looks like. Okay. All right, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so slideshow. Okay. All right, so this is kind of another involved topic. So again, we can decide if you want to vote on this tonight, or I was thinking that this might also be a good topic for the kind of summit that we have coming up with the executive committee and the standing committee chairs. And of course, all the board members will be invited to that too in April. But the next item is this funding that we have already available within one of our U.S. Forest Service grants. There's $18,000 that we had written into the proposal to kind of move forward with the next phase of a space study for what has always been envisioned as a physical forest center building or location where the partnership could kind of have a headquarters, and it would also be combined with sort of community resources and a visitor center, or any number of different uses that would put forward the partnership's mission. So on the slide here, there's some verbiage that's been used in the past about the vision for what the Forest Center would be. We of course have the virtual Forest Center website, which we were hoping to share. Well, actually, it's the partnership's home website we're also working on. We were hoping to share that this evening, and we will if we have time. But the idea of, having some resources posted online about forestry and resources for municipal forests as a first step. And then we've also had, coming out of the committees, the idea of starting educational programming and just beginning to host woods walks and other events in our different towns that kind of highlight the landscape of the partnership and also kind of get into some of the economic development priorities that we have. So the enabling legislation, talks about a multipurpose center, and I just included in different colors there some of the potential uses for that space that have been in past descriptions. And then a couple of years ago, we had the Williams College students who did a semester-long project looking at potential sites. We've shared the link to that report with you all, and I encourage you to take a look at it again because they did do quite a lot of work, including a survey online, gauging board members and others from the community about what they would like to see in such a center. So my question for you tonight is that we have this $18,000 available. I'm looking for direction if we could go ahead and seek to hire a consultant to do what would be kind of a next step in space planning. And we had originally, when we wrote this into the proposal, we talked with the folks over at Greylock Glen and Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, who did some early space planning work for that outdoor center. And so that was kind of the model that we were using for including that in the grant. But then as we've talked about it with Dickon, there are some questions now about, well, where is this ultimately going to be located? So I guess that's my question for you this evening is, do we need more work on identifying a final highest priority location for this center before we do hiring of a consultant? Or do you think we can take the next step in defining specific spaces that the board wants to see in such a center? And while we still continue to work on, finding the ideal location. And there's money sitting in the grant, so we either need to spend it or get permission to do something else with it, or, request a modification. So that's the question this evening.
And I would like just to make the one comment that we don't actually have the funding to build a center. So
correct.
I think we have to think a little bit about, does it make sense to spend $18,000 on figuring out how much space we want or need for something that we don't know whether we'll get the funds to even do. And this is really somewhat of a limited study. It's not an actual, this is how much it's going to cost to actually build it. This is sort of a, well, how big do you want it? And then we can figure out how much it'll cost. So it's $18,000 that I'm not convinced is that just hiring a consultant and getting this answer of this many square feet with no idea whether we'll get funding to do it, whether that really makes the most sense, or whether there's a way we could have that money, redirected to do more of what we know we can do and feel we should do, which is programming. I know it wasn't intended to be for programming, it was intended to be for what Lisa described, but do we want to just, say vote to hire a consultant, or do we want to see if there's something related to programming that we could do with it, and whether we could change the contract to allow us to do that?
Art.
Yes.
Well, I'm a little confused because I know we've talked from the beginning about the possibility of a physical location for a center, but I thought in the meantime, I thought we were investing in developing a virtual forest center, and it seems like the $18,000 could be better spent developing a robust website with marketing and program listings and that sort of thing, rather than looking at a concrete facility at the moment that we're not sure where it would be or what we do at it.
So
Or if we
we
could
are
get the
doing
money.
both of those already. We have other funding that's helping to develop the virtual forest center through the Row MVP grant, and we're partnering with Mass Audubon on that. And that'll be launched by June when that grant closes. So we are doing that already. And yeah, Rhonda and Okateo Cultural Center have also been partners in that effort, bringing in Indigenous voices in that work as well. So
I think the
Okay.
question about this for me is, are there grants that would potentially fund the building of a center and buying of land where a study such as this would be beneficial to have conducted? That's my question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe someone on the call does. And then my other idea is there a way that this could be conducted in such a way that would be in support of initiatives that you need to undertake for the feasibility study for a heritage area? So what does the community need in order to showcase what the heritage area would be focused on? If those two things are true, what I just said, then I think there's more of an argument for going through with it. If they aren't, I agree, but I'm not on the board. But
sorry, well, I was going to say something and now I've forgotten. I guess my question too is the Forest Center idea has always been on the books, since I've been involved as agent. And it was in the old plan, but I mean, I guess, is it still a priority? And then maybe that's something that the board wants to talk about again or ask, but there's several sites highlighted in the student report. And then since then, there's been, developments where maybe Hall Tavern Farm, there's been challenges with the idea of using the barn there as space. It's going to be very expensive. Some of the other sites were a state park. There's mixed feelings about that. So, I don't know, maybe we need to revisit the overall question of whether a forest center is something that the partnership really wants. But there are Wood Innovations grants. We can certainly keep writing grants to do that if that's something that the board wants. But yeah, in the meantime, what do we do?
Well, I like the idea of Dick and Head of redirecting the funds. Maybe we can redirect it to be a beginning of funding to help landowners with land conservation. I mean, paying for appraisals, surveys, lawyer time, all these things that help families make decisions. You could use that portions of that money to really leverage big dollars to help a number of landowners. So we would get some nice press about actually doing land conservation for the forest partnership.
Deb has her hand up.
I just have a question. I mean, I wonder if it might make more sense to get the virtual center up and running and see how people use it and get, how well it's being utilized. So they give us a really much better view as to what kind of a physical space we might need at some point. And if we don't have any funding to not only build the space, but to manage and run it and the rent or whatever it would take to do it, maybe we need to take that 18,000 and put it more towards outreach programs, that sort of thing, but I think, as we sit in our virtual meeting, that, so much of the world is virtual now. So maybe we stick with that for 6 months and see what happens and see how people use it. So.
Mary Beth has her hand up.
I agree that getting the virtual off the ground, and I know Lisa, you said that you've already been working on that, but perhaps if we had a summary of the items that were planned to be in the virtual, and then there are a lot of new board members, we could have an updated brainstorming to determine what other ones could be in there. For example, what was mentioned earlier, the conservation restrictions, that could be a presentation, a virtual presentation that people could go online and see, and then at the end can learn more, contact so-and-so, so that we're not spending quite as much going out first, but we're able to reach out to them first and then go out to follow up.
So should Lisa and I investigate the flexibility in how we could allocate this funding and then report back?
I think that sounds like a good idea, to think about other ways to use the funding. When we talked about this at the natural resource based economic development, there were the 3 sites. It was like a Wickham Summit, I think.
The Wickham Summit in Florida, at Mohawk Trail.
At the State Forest,
State Forest.
And then at Hall Tavern
Farm. Yeah.
Which I think all 3 of those had substantial negatives.
Yeah.
That I really think you really had to go back to the drawing board on where this would even be located.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thought is, because we know we want to do programming, maybe the Forest Service would just let us, do a modification and use that funding for what we've talked about with, starting with woods walks and just, kind of having a mobile forest center at this point, for events with whatever partners want to work with us, and building community interest and engagement with the partnership. So we'll see what we can do with that, if that sounds good to everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a quick question that you kind of alluded to, which is the virtual forest center with Mass Audubon. And I sort of feel like we as a board, or at least I don't really know kind of what Mass Audubon is doing and as it relates to this grant we're doing together. And maybe for an upcoming board meeting or and have Mass Audubon or someone from Mass Audubon participate so we can kind of get a sense of that.
The June summer meeting is planning to be the debut of the virtual force center, right, Lisa?
Yeah, we've talked about that. Well, we haven't had an executive committee meeting in a while, but yeah, that written into the grant is a launch event for the website resource. And so we talked about having that kind of be a highlight at the annual meeting in June, since the grant will close then anyway. So it could be a good time to focus on that. And we were going to share the website for the partnership tonight, but we're kind of running out of time, I think. So
I'm going to send all of you the link to the new website, which is a development link. And I appreciate any feedback you have. It's still almost ready to be live, but I'll do that by email and you can follow up with me.
Sounds good.
And I think I'm just going to quickly move through the rest of my report here, because there are some important updates we wanted to share. And this is going to let me advance. No, it's not going to let me move. There we go. Okay, so, okay, here we go at the beginning. So as mentioned earlier, good news that we have been able to work with Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs to extend the agent contract for another 6 months through the end of 2025. So this covers, staff and expenses for Kate's coordinator role and myself, which I'm committing about 40% of my time at NEF to the partnership work. And as mentioned, there's some additional funding there for this heritage area work. So that's good news. And we need to keep working on, trying to find the long-term sustainability funding for the partnership to do things like hire an executive director. Wanted to mention that we have set April 16th, 4 to 5 p.m. for a hybrid meeting, which would be this opportunity for the executive committee to get together with all of the standing committee chairs, and board members, of course, welcome, to kind of refocus on some big picture priorities. So perhaps we can, revisit the forest center discussion there and the pros and cons of a physical center. We need to keep working on policy outreach. And we keep wanting to look back at the 10-year plan and kind of pull out some different projects or programs that you all would like from each committee, basically, and the mission priorities, what you'd like the agent to be working on kind of in this last 18 months. Okay, there's that. And then other good news, Senator Mark has submitted a bill regarding the requested name change. So it's SD 2960, an act renaming the Woodlands Partnership of Northwest Massachusetts. So we had a good call with Senator Mark recently. I'm forgetting which committee that was at right now, but anyway, it is moving through. I guess it's headed to Environment and Natural Resources, and it may take a little while for this to move forward, but we're glad that we actually do have some submitted legislation. I don't believe this addresses the issue with the wording of the partnership fund and the trust fund, but it sounds like we need to do the name change first and then perhaps address that other issue afterwards. So we're going to keep talking with Senator Mark and other legislators about that. Wanted to invite you all to a series of events coming up through another grant with EEA. We were hosting a series of 3 landowner events this late winter and spring. So next Thursday, March 7th, we have a virtual workshop for landowners on setting goals for your land. The registration link is on the flyer here, and Kate has sent this out to you all. The second event would be an estate planning forum. Attorney Elizabeth Roblicka has agreed to speak at that, and we're finalizing the date. And then John Sears, a landowner in Holly, who's going to speak at this goals workshop, has agreed to host a woods walk at his land in early May as well. So you're all invited if you can make any of those events. And then this slide here focuses on our efforts to kind of work together with the Conti Refuge. We had Markel Smith attend the fall board meeting where she shared a little bit about that work, and the partnership is signed on as a partner. So they submit funding priorities all the time to the to actually Congress, I guess, and it's called a lookbook. So Kate and I came up with some proposals to include there. And actually, this does kind of focus on this idea of starting forest center programming locally as a first step. And so we actually came up with some wording for this, which, you know, maybe we can apply this to that $18,000. But there was the idea of having a portable educational display or a kiosk of some sort, which probably we need to purchase that. But many of the events we can kind of do at a low cost pretty much any time that we have the time and capacity to get them organized. So let's see. And I guess the last thing I was going to share, we've had a lot of good meetings lately, but Dickon and I met with Climate Chief Hoffer and Stephanie Cooper from EEA a few weeks ago. And it was encouraging that we talked a lot about the Forest's Climate Solutions Initiative of the Healy administration. But we also heard that, you know, she did ask, what does the partnership want? What tell us what you need, basically. So we are working on a list of kind of bulleted priorities that we could send back. And, you know, much of the state policy is underway, and, you know, they're coming up with all of their programs for forestry and conservation and other initiatives where there's going to be funding coming forward. But this is sort of a short list to start compiling things that we've talked about for the partnership, both staff capacity and some different project ideas. So if you all have other things you would like to suggest for this list, please email me and Kate and Dickon, and we will talk about them and try to put forward what we think are the best options to pursue. And I think that was all I had on my list. Thanks for your patience.
Dickon, do you want to share briefly about the UMass March 21st event?
Yes. And I think there's something about the meeting that we had with Climate Chief Hoffer when she asked that question about, you know, what do you really need? I responded with, we want you to listen to us. And so I think it's important to kind of think of that EEA has gone through this whole process with the Forest as a Climate Solution Initiative, and then the Forest Climate Committee and the report. And we have had, like, as a region, really little, if no input at all. And I think it's important that we try to organize our thoughts and what input we would like them to take from us. So that's part of, you know, a response to them. I think if we can all think about what we would like them to hear, as opposed to us being told, this is how you're going to manage your forest. It should be a little bit of us saying, this is how we can manage our forest. This is how we would like to manage our forest. So that it's a two-way street, not just coming from EEA at us, and we're just supposed to accept it. So anyway, with those thoughts in mind, comments would be great to get that we can relay back to them. But there's the March 21st, what is it called? Climate forests.
Innovation, canopy.
Canopy.
Yeah, canopy just makes no, I mean, it's, yeah, you can call it that, but you have no idea what it means. But the subtitle, if you will, forests and
Climate and innovation.
and innovations, right? Is being offered, I would say, to the affected forest community affected by the moratorium on management projects on state-owned land, that at first some people, it was a very significant cost in that jobs that were expected to go out that had already been approved were held back, and that was work people were expecting that they didn't have, logs that mills were expecting that they didn't get. And I think EEA is aware that there was a negative impact as a result of this, and they sort of have offered this innovations conference as I don't know, a thing that hopefully will be beneficial to the affected community. And I think it could be a really good thing. I'm really excited about it.
The partnership will have a table there, just to let you know. So yeah, if anyone's interested in attending, we do have a couple free tickets, and we can probably pay for if several board members are interested. So let us know.
Yeah, I think I don't know how the turnout is going to be. There was talk of it being an invitation only thing, and now it seems, am I correct, Lisa? I know you're probably more tuned into. There's of course a committee of which.
Yeah, I think the tables were limited because of space, I guess. And I'm not exactly sure who all. I mean, I think it's open to the public, but originally there was some discussion about that. But
yeah, it's open.
Yeah.
You can register freely at this
So
point.
I think it would be really good to have a big turnout. So I guess I'm, asking as many of the board members and just people who you think would be interested to sign up and come to this, because I think it sends a message, particularly from the partnership region, if we are there. So if you can come to this, I think it'll be really worth it, because I think there's going to be some great presentations, but it's also important, I think, to show the administration that we are out here and they should listen to us. So anyway, that's what I got on that.
okay, so we are 5 minutes after the hour, so we've run a little bit over, but I think it was a very important conversation about the heritage areas. We did have a whole bunch of brief committee updates at the end here, so I don't know if folks want to hang on. We do have the committee summit coming up. It's 6 weeks from now, but
it might make sense to have that conversation more in depth at the summit, especially because Amy's not here. And there's the membership is dropping off.
Yeah.
I mean,
are folks
I get
okay
it.
with that? Or if anybody has anything
Yes.
burning to share?
Well, yeah, Lisa, I'm shocked that you forgot that Paul Mark was at my committee meeting.
I'm so sorry, Sam. There's so many of you all.
Just kidding, yes. Yeah, you guys have a full plate. I don't know how you do it. We'll have to have
Well, thank you.
about that.
All right, so I guess there was, well,